I stood at the entrance of that restaurant in my good flannel shirt. The one my late wife Diane said made me look like a real gentleman Ray. And I thought I'd prepared myself for anything. I hadn't. The woman who would become my son's mother-in-law looked me up and down, exactly the way you'd look at a scratch on your new car. Her eyes went from my boots to my collar and back again, and then she leaned toward her husband and said, loud enough that I could hear, not quite loud enough that she had to own it. I thought you said he ran a property business. Her husband, Jeffrey Alderton, cleared his throat. He does. She said. And that single sound carried everything. It carried, not our kind, not what I expected, not good enough. My son Jonah was right behind me. He squeezed my shoulder once very lightly and said in my ear, Dad, I need you to stay with me tonight, can you do that? I looked at him. 28 years old, my boy, and he had this expression on his face that I hadn't seen since he was 12 and had figured out something I hadn't told him yet. Calm. Certain, like he was already 3 steps ahead. What's going on? I asked. Just stay with me, he said. Please. So I did. I want to tell you about that night. But to tell you about that night, I have to tell you about the 40 years before it. Because none of it makes sense without the before. I started working when I was 16. That's not unusual. Plenty of men my age did. But I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, the son of a man who spent 30 years underground in the nickel mines. And there was never any conversation in our house about what you might like to do when you grow up. You worked. You worked hard. You were grateful for it. My father died at 61. His lungs were shot. He died knowing that I had a small landscaping company with 4 employees and a truck that I'd paid off myself. He told me he was proud. I believed him, and I still believe him. By the time Jonah was born, I'd built that landscaping company into something different. We still cut grass. We still did snow removal in the winters, which in Sudbury is not a small thing. But I'd also started buying parcels of land, small ones at first, then larger. Nothing glamorous. Scrubby lots on the edge of town, a few rural acres that other people didn't want. I bought what I could afford, and I held it, and I waited. My accountant told me more than once that I was going to be sitting on a pile of frozen dirt for the rest of my life. He was wrong, but that's not the point. The point is that I built everything I had with my hands and my patience, and a lot of years where I didn't take vacations and I drove used trucks and I said no to myself more often than I said yes. I am not embarrassed by any of that. I never have been. Jonah's mother, my wife Diane, died when Jonah was 19. Cancer. The fast kind. We had 7 months from diagnosis to the day I held her hand while she went. And I will not say more about that because some things belong only to the person who lived them. Jonah handled it the way you handle something that nearly breaks you. Slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of backsliding and a lot of grace mixed in. He finished his degree in civil engineering in Halifax. He got a job with a firm in Ottawa. He called me every Sunday without fail, even the Sundays when there wasn't much to say. He met Tessa Alderton at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. That's what he told me. She was doing marketing for one of the big sponsors, and she was, I'll admit, absolutely lovely. Funny, smart, the kind of person who asks real questions and then actually listens to the answers. I liked her immediately. I want to make sure that's clear because what I'm about to tell you is not about Tessa. It's about her parents. Jeffrey and Maureen Alderton were from Westmount. The Montreal neighborhood where the money is old and the opinions are strong, and the doors have those heavy brass knockers that announce, before anyone answers, that this is not a home where you show up uninvited. Jeffrey had spent his career in commercial real estate development. Maureen sat on 3 charity boards and organized an annual gala that raised significant money for causes she described with the word legacy. They were not bad people. I want to be careful there too. I don't think evil intent is the right frame for what they were. They were simply people who had spent so many years inside a particular world that they'd lost the ability to imagine another one. And when their daughter brought home a young man from a family like mine, a family where the money came from dirt, literally, from land and labor and decades of unglamorous work, they didn't know what to do with that. What they did, I would learn, was try to fix it. The first time I met them was at a dinner at their home in Westmount. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Large, immaculate, full of art that I didn't recognize but understood I was supposed to. Maureen served wine that I later found out cost more than my first truck. Jeffrey shook my hand and said, "So Jonah tells me you're in property, mostly rural land holdings," I said, "some commercial leasing." He nodded in the way that people nod when they're being polite while deciding you're not serious. "Small scale, medium, I'd say." Another nod. "And before that? You mentioned something about landscaping?" "I ran a landscaping company for about 20 years. Still own it, actually. My foreman Stuart runs it day to day." Maureen, who was refilling glasses, said nothing, but she smiled at me with her mouth while her eyes did something else entirely. That was the first dinner. By the third dinner I understood the shape of what they wanted. They wanted Tessa to be happy, yes. But they also wanted Jonah to be something that fit their picture. They started making suggestions, subtle at first. A mention of Jeffrey's connections at a development firm in Toronto. A comment about how moving to Montreal might make sense given Tessa's network here. An offer, framed very warmly, to introduce Jonah to some people who could accelerate his career. Jonah told me about each of these conversations on our Sunday calls. He was diplomatic about it. "They're just trying to help, Dad," he said once. And then a pause. "I think, do you want their help?" I asked. Another pause. "I want Tessa," he said. "The rest is noise." I loved him for that, I still do. The engagement dinner was held at a private room in a restaurant in Old Montreal called Chez Bernadette. Jeffrey had booked it. 14 people around a long table. The Aldertons, their son Spencer and his wife, a couple I'd never met named Whitford who were introduced as family friends going back 30 years. Jonah's cousin Alec and his girlfriend, Tessa's maid of honor, and me. Just me, on my side. Jonah had asked his cousin Alec to be there specifically, I think, so I wouldn't be alone. I noticed that. I arrived on time, which meant I arrived before the Aldertons, which turned out to be a slight breach of some protocol I didn't know existed. The matron was gracious. I stood near the door and waited, and when the Aldertons arrived with their group, Maureen saw me and did the thing I described at the beginning. The look, the lean toward Jeffrey, the sound. And then she recovered herself and extended her hand and said, "So lovely you could make it up from Sudbury." "What a drive I flew," I said. "Oh, a little recalibration." Well, still, we sat down. I was placed at the far end of the table from Jeffrey, which felt deliberate, though I suppose it might not have been. Jonah was between Tessa and me, and he spent the first part of the evening doing the work that young people in complicated families do. Moving conversations smoothly across distances, translating between registers, making everyone feel like they were in the right room. He was good at it. Diane would have recognized where he got that from. About 45 minutes in, there was a moment. Jeffrey was talking about a property development project he'd been involved in. Something on the South Shore, mixed residential and commercial. And he gestured toward me in a way that was meant to include me and said, "I suppose you've seen that kind of development up in the Sudbury area too. With the mining corridor, we've seen some of it," I said, "different scale." He nodded. And then the Whitford man, his name was Bruce Whitford, and he had the kind of tan you only get from a golf course, said, without really looking at me, "Is it true you built your business from a lawn care service?" He said lawn care service the way you'd say participation trophy. The table went a little quiet. Not dramatically. Just that particular quiet where everyone's listening while pretending they're not. I said, "Yes. Started with a second-hand mower and a truck I bought for $4,000. I still have the truck." Bruce Whitford laughed, which was worse than if he hadn't. Maureen smiled at her wine glass. And then Jonah said, very calmly without looking up from his bread plate, "Dad's properties are assessed at just under $9 million. And that's before the municipal boundary review comes through." He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. No heat, no performance, just information. The table went quiet again, differently this time. Jeffrey cleared his throat. Bruce Whitford picked up his wine. Maureen set hers down. I looked at my son. He was buttering his bread. He didn't look up. Under the table I felt his foot press once against mine. "I've got this, Dad. Just stay." After dinner there were toasts. Jeffrey gave one, polished, warm, exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd spent decades in rooms like this one. He said all the right things about Tessa and about Jonah and about the joining of two families. He didn't look at me when he said the last part. Spencer, Tessa's brother, gave a shorter one. He was warmer than his father, and I thought he might be embarrassed by the earlier moment, because he made a point of catching my eye and raising his glass specifically in my direction. Then Jonah stood. He thanked everyone. He talked about Tessa in a way that was real and not rehearsed. Specific things, moments, the particular way she laughs when something actually surprises her. Tessa was crying a little. I was close to it myself, and then he said, "I also want to say something about my father." Jeffrey smiled pleasantly. "My father built everything he has from the ground up," Jonah said. "I mean that literally. From the ground. He spent 20 years running a landscaping company in northern Ontario in a climate that would break most people, and he saved every dollar he could, and he bought land that nobody else wanted, and he waited. He waited the way patient people wait, not passively but actively watching, learning, making small moves year after year." He paused. "I learned everything I know about how to build something real from watching him do it." He raised his glass toward me. "To my dad, Reg." He stopped himself. "To my dad," he said. "The most capable man I know." I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. After the dinner, when we were getting our coats, Jeffrey Alderton put his hand on my arm and said, "Your boy is something else," and I think he meant it. I think that was real. I said, "I know." I want to tell you that after that night, things settled into something comfortable. I want to tell you that Jeffrey and Maureen came to see me differently, and that the wedding planning was smooth, and that everything moved toward a good ending the way you hope it will. But here's the thing about people who live inside a certain world. Sometimes they don't revise, they recalculate. About 3 months after the engagement dinner, Jonah called me on a Tuesday, not a Sunday. That was the first sign. "Dad," he said, "I need you to look at something." He emailed me a document that evening. It was a proposal, drafted on Alderton Group letterhead, outlining a family partnership structure for the development of some of my rural properties near the Sudbury-Espanola corridor. Jeffrey's development company would serve as the lead partner. The financial structure was detailed and, on the surface, appeared to offer me a percentage of the proceeds. I read it twice. Then I sent it to my lawyer, a woman named Sandra Keel, who has been handling my property matters for 11 years, and who has the particular gift of translating legal language into plain speech without losing the meaning. She called me the next morning. "Vernon," she said, "this agreement, as written, would transfer operational control of 4 of your parcels to the Alderton Group for an initial term of 15 years, with automatic renewal clauses that are, frankly, written to be invisible to someone not looking for them. Your percentage of proceeds is real, but it's calculated after a management fee structure that would eat most of it." I asked her what it amounted to. "At current projections," she said, "you would receive approximately 14 to 18% of the revenue generated from your own land, over a 15-year period, in exchange for surrendering development rights entirely." I sat with that for a minute. "And Jeffrey Alderton knows his way around these structures," I said. It wasn't a question. "He built his career on them," Sandra said. I asked her one more thing. Had she seen anything in the document that might constitute fraud? She paused. "That's a different question," she said. "Let me look more carefully and call you back." She called me back that afternoon. What she found, buried in an appendix that referenced a separate schedule that referenced a municipal filing from 2019, was a discrepancy in the land survey descriptions. 2 of the parcels listed in the agreement used legal descriptions that had been subtly altered from the registered descriptions on file with the Ontario Land Registry. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to matter. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Sandra said carefully, "that if you signed this and then later challenged the agreement, the altered descriptions would create a title dispute that could tie up those parcels for years, possibly allow the Alderton Group to claim adverse possession interest under certain conditions." I asked her to prepare a full analysis and to document every discrepancy. Then I called Jonah. He was quiet for a long time after I finished explaining. Finally he said, "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday. Confirmed today." Another silence. Then, "Dad, I need you to not do anything yet. Can you give me 2 weeks?" I trusted him. I gave him 2 weeks. I don't know everything Jonah did in those 2 weeks. He's told me some of it and I've pieced together the rest. I know he hired his own legal counsel. Someone he found independently, not through the Aldertons. I know he went back through the engagement period and found that Jeffrey had made similar proposals to at least 2 other families in the greater Montreal area. Rural landowners, people with assets but without the legal sophistication to recognize what they were signing. One of those families had signed. They were in the middle of a quiet dispute that their own lawyer had told them would cost more to fight than to settle. I know that Jonah brought all of this to Tessa. That part I can only imagine, and I try not to imagine it too vividly, because I know what it costs a person to look at someone they love, and understand that their family has done something genuinely wrong. What I know is that Tessa came to see me. She drove up to Sudbury on a Thursday, which is not a small thing from Montreal. She sat at my kitchen table, and she drank tea, and she said, "I didn't know. I want you to know that." I believed her. I still believe her. She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "What do you think should happen?" She looked at her tea for a long time. Then she said, "I think the truth should come out. I think the Hamiltons should be made whole." The Hamiltons were the family who'd already signed. And I think my father needs to understand that what he did was not a business strategy. It was theft. She said that last word quietly, like she was testing the weight of it. I said, "Your father is going to disagree." She said, "I know." What happened next happened largely without me, and that was by design. Jonah had coordinated with Sandra with his own counsel, and this is the part I find hardest to fully absorb, with an investigator from the Ontario Securities Commission, who had been looking at the Alderton Group's land partnership structures for unrelated reasons, and who found Jonah's documentation extremely useful. The Aldertons were informed, through legal channels, of the discrepancies in the proposed agreement and the title fraud implications. Jeffrey's response, initially, was to claim that the altered survey descriptions were an administrative error. His lawyer put that in writing. Sandra Keel, who has been doing this long enough to have very little patience for certain kinds of explanations, responded in kind. The Hamilton family was compensated. Jeffrey's firm settled with them privately for an amount that Sandra told me, without telling me the number was significant and appropriate. Jeffrey Alderton did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because this is not a story where everything resolves into perfect justice. What happened was, the OSC investigation resulted in regulatory findings. The Alderton Group paid substantial fines. Jeffrey resigned from the 2 corporate boards he sat on, and Maureen's charity gala was quietly cancelled for that year and has not, to my knowledge, been revived. In certain rooms in Westmount, that is a particular kind of reckoning. The wedding did not happen. Jonah was the one who made that decision, and Tessa was the one who agreed with it. And I was not asked for my opinion, which was correct. This was their life. Jonah told me about it on a Sunday call, which felt right. He said, "She's a good person, Dad, she's one of the best people I know. But I can't build a marriage on a foundation that was designed to take something from you. And she knows that. She actually said it first." I asked him if he was okay. He said, "I will be. Are you okay?" I thought about that. I thought about my properties, which remain registered in my name with their correct legal descriptions. I thought about the Hamilton family, who got their money back. I thought about Maureen Alderton's look at that restaurant door, and Jeffrey's nod at the first dinner, and Bruce Whitford's laugh, and Jonah's foot pressing against mine under the table. I thought about Diane, who always said, "The truth is the most patient thing in the world. It never stops waiting." I said, "I think I am." It's been 2 years since that engagement dinner. Jonah is doing well. He took a position with a firm in Calgary that does infrastructure work, which suits him. We still talk every Sunday. He's been on a few dates. He sounds like himself. The 4 parcels near the Sudbury-Espanola corridor that were listed in Jeffrey Alderton's proposal are, as of this spring, subject to a municipal review for potential commercial development related to a new regional transit corridor. Sandra tells me the assessment value will likely change substantially when that process concludes. I still have the truck. I was talking to my neighbor Keith a few weeks ago. He's been on my road for 30 years, knew me when I was driving that truck and doing jobs myself, and he asked me how things were going. I told him shortened version. He shook his head and said, "People always think money makes them smarter than it does." That's about the most accurate summary I've heard. I've been thinking lately about what I'd tell a younger man who found himself in something like this. A man who walked into a room and understood, from a look and a half-heard comment, that he was not what someone wanted for their family. Here's what I'd say, Z. Don't shrink. Don't explain yourself to people who've already decided not to hear it. Do your work carefully, know what you own, and have a good lawyer you trust. The rest has a way of sorting itself out, if you're patient enough to let it. That's not a very satisfying lesson, maybe, but it's the true one. I arrived at that restaurant in Sudbury flannel and 40 years of early mornings, and I left knowing that my son is the kind of man who squeezes your shoulder and says, "Stay with me, I've got this," and then actually does. I don't know what more a father can ask for than that.